Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I wonder if you're like me, wondering what the heck is going on in our country and how did we get here and what are we going to do about it? Well, I've put a lot of thought to that and I wanted to share some of my thoughts. I think like a lot of people, we're very upset and it's very complicated and confusing. And so I want to share what I think are some of the underlying causes of what's happening, which I call the Great Divides, which is something that author Otto Scharmer talked about in his book, Theory U. Those Great Divides are 6 issues. I break them into categories I call SPEECs, S-P-E-E-C-S. There's social, political, economic, ecological, corporate, and spiritual divisions. So let's start talking about what we've been seeing going on. And let's start with COVID first. What I'd like you to do is I'd like you to imagine for a moment 11 jumbo jet planes lined up on the runway, each holding 400 people, 4,400 people. That's how many people died in one day. More than 25% above the number of people that died in 9/11. That's how many people are dying every single day. And that's a terrible travesty. And our hearts and our prayers and our thanks need to go out, first of all, to all those who've lost someone, and then also to all of those doctors and nurses who are doing an amazing job. It brings tears to my eyes. I was watching a show a couple nights ago about EMTs and the stress they're under and making minimum wage and you know, I don't want to go into the details. We've all heard those stories, but you know, how did this happen? And why do we see so many people dying? Well, you know, there's some underlying conditions if you've been paying attention to the news, but it strikes people of older age and people that have underlying conditions, people that haven't been able to afford health care or eating properly. And that sort of leads to a second major issue, which is economics. Now, before I go back in time and paint the big picture about economics, let's talk about how in March of this year, we had more people file for unemployment than have ever filed it before. 6 million people. Before that, the most was around 700,000 filed for unemployment claims. And we reached a peak of 40 million people unemployed. Now that number's back down now, but that doesn't mean that those people are well, because another interesting statistic is from the Pew Center, where they said that 42% of Americans didn't have $500 in the bank. And that includes people that were making 6-figure incomes. And so you might say to yourself, well, why did people not have enough money in the bank? How could people even making 6-figure incomes over $100,000 not have $500 in the bank? Well, now let me go back in time and say that, you know, 3 decades ago, and some of you may not have even been born then, but the way the economy was structured was that one person could have a job and make enough money to provide for a single family income. Now, today, that's not true. In fact, the average is over 2 people. We need over 2 people working full time to achieve the same level of income, which is around $70,000 or $80,000. And what happened over the last 30 years is several things. First of all, wages basically were stagnant. I mean, for almost 2 decades, wages did not go up, and they only started going up right at the beginning of 2019. But the cost of living has continued to climb. Now, don't believe this consumer price index stuff is like 2% or 2.2% or whatever it was, because that doesn't measure a lot of things. It doesn't measure healthcare costs. My healthcare costs went up 100%. 100% in 10 years. It doesn't measure the cost of internet going up, and it doesn't measure the cost of my telephone service going up, and there's a lot of things that aren't included. Now, another interesting thing on why our costs have gone up, and it's sort of invisible, is because you used to buy a can of coffee and it was 16 ounces. Now that can is still the same, but the amount of coffee went down to 14 ounces, and some places it's gone down to 12 ounces, but you're still paying the same amount for that. And so it's misleading because the cost has actually gone up. Another example is chicken. You know, when you buy chicken and you're paying $3, $4 a pound, it now says that it has 10 to 15% chicken broth in it. Well, that's water. So for 2 or 3 ounces of water to make it heavier, you're paying 3 or 4, maybe even more dollars per pound. So if you looked at some charts over time, what you'd see is that, you know, incomes have been flat and the cost of living has actually gone up and up and up. Now, I think another major cost of living, what you all know about, is the cost of colleges. I mean, the cost of college has gone up over 400% in just 20 years. So now let's look at another economic factor. And this is an example of the great divisions between the haves and the have-nots. In the last year, a handful of billionaires have made $1 trillion, while 40% of people, millions and millions of people, didn't have $500 in the bank, lost the multiple jobs they needed to maintain a standard of living, had greater debt than they've ever had before because they had to buy things using credit. And that sort of points to this deep emptiness we feel inside because we've lost purpose and meaning and joy because we have to work so hard to pay off debt. And these people that don't have the incomes also can't afford health care, and therefore they're the ones that are more susceptible to COVID. And on top of that, we had a huge racial unrest with the death of George Floyd. And, you know, I like to think of it like this, you know, these things didn't just happen. You know, the racial injustices in our country have existed for over 100 years, but you can't solve a problem if it's beneath the surface. You know, you have to overcome resistance and overcome denial and bring it out, and that's what these people are doing. But yet, here we saw these peaceful protesters marching in Washington, getting bombed with gas and shot with rubber bullets. And on the other side of the fence, on January 6th, we saw a different group of people who were armed, who were doing violence, who brought Molotov cocktails, who threatened to kill people. And you didn't see the same forces, the same strength, show of force blocking them. And so we have racial divisions, we have economic divisions, we have social divisions, health divisions. We also, of course, have political divisions. I mean, this idea that I'm supposed to believe, as a patriot who served my country as a submarine officer, as someone who loves my country and hates seeing what's going on, really, you want me to believe that there are tens of thousands of people in all the states and all the judges and all of the CIA or FBI, and there's some great fraud being perpetuated, and there's not one email, not one dead person they found in 60 lawsuits? Come on, really? I mean, this is not true. You know, our system of government has worked. We had free and fair elections, and the people that disagreed filed 60 lawsuits and never provided any shred of evidence. There's no collusion been found. I mean, who would have been doing this? You know, how could they have communicated to all of these judges? I mean, you know, 3 people can't rob a bank and not get caught because one of them ends up telling, or there's evidence and there's emails and all kinds of that stuff. But there's none of this has been found, and none of this has been presented in 60 lawsuits. So we had elections. We've been told that they were the safest, most secure elections we've ever had, and I believe that. Yet we have some individuals and people that are trying to say that this isn't true, that their country and government has been stolen. Just put the issue aside and just, I think you can all agree with me, we have massive political divisions. So we have social divisions, political, economic. I haven't even talked about the ecological divisions, about the massive numbers of storms that we've been having, about the devastation of fires and floods. You remember Australia? Do you remember the fires in California? Do you remember the floods? Do you remember the massive number of hurricanes we've had, the unprecedented number of hurricanes? So I'm going to go back and say the great divisions fall into these 6 categories, SPEECS: social, political, economic, ecological, corporate, and spiritual. So let's talk about spiritual for a minute. You know, I believe in God, and I believe in the power of prayers. And I think Jesus is one of the best teachers. Whether you believe he's the Son of God or not is irrelevant. Let's just take the person and the words and the teachings. He promoted to love thy neighbor as thyself. He promoted to judge not, lest you be judged. Take the log out of your own eye before you stick it in someone else's. So where are all of the great spiritual teachers? Where are all the great evangelical teachers? I'm sorry to say, but the vast majority that I see are actually not promoting the essence of the teachings of Jesus. They're promoting hatred and division. They're perpetuating some of these things. It's a terrible hypocrisy. And I don't mean to attack any particular religion or any particular person. The reason I'm making this message is to share to you that what is happening is a combination of events and legacies, sometimes hundreds of years in the making, going back hundreds of years to when Black people were enslaved, going back decades to when the fabric of society shifted and it required 2 jobs and incomes remained flat as costs increased, as healthcare costs doubled, as college costs doubled. And you can start to see that what is happening right now with COVID, with the racial unrest, with the racial inequalities, with the economic inequalities, have all come up, and COVID was the catalyst. Now, I actually believe there's a reason behind all this. I don't believe in accidents. I believe in God, and I believe that this is all as it was meant to be. I believe that we are being called, that everyone has to choose. I wrote about this in my book, 11 Days in May, in the preface. It was called The Battlefield Where We Now Stand. And I wrote these words where everyone must choose between who and what they love more. You can't be in the middle. You have to decide. If you're an American, then you support and defend the Constitution, and you believe in freedom of speech and freedom of religion. That does not mean you can use freedom of speech and freedom of religion to enforce or push someone else to believe in your beliefs. And that's one of the great things about our country. It's a tribute to our founding fathers, how they created the separation of powers, and it's worked. We had a free and fair election. It's not a federal election. It's determined by the states. The states certified it. We have the separation of powers in the judicial branch. And those that felt offended were allowed to bring up 60 lawsuits. They all were defeated, with, I think, the exception of maybe one in Pennsylvania. And now it's time to move on. Now it's time for us to focus on the ties that bind. And so this is my second major point. The first major point is the great divisions, understanding what's happening at these 6 major levels and categories, understanding that we have structural problems in our country, and it's not going to be solved quickly. They've been decades in the making. And so what we have to focus on first and foremost is the ties that bind us. What are the ties that bind us? Well, first of all, you and I all have 99.999999999% the same DNA. Secondly, you and I are all 98% the same air, water, and minerals. Combine those two things, sort of our physical essence and our invisible coding, the programming that's in our cells, and we are less than 1 in 1 billion parts physically and biologically different. Let me say that again. We are less than 1 in 1 billion parts physically and biologically different. You see, I'm a part of you and you're a part of me because we actually share thoughts. This part of our brain, which is called the frontal cortex, is a sender and a receiver of information. Just like your iPhone or your Android phone is receiving frequencies, and it processes that frequency, which is carried through light. That's why we call it a carrier signal. You know, AT&T and Verizon, that's the carrier signal. That signal is carrying information, and that information is converted to documents and music and things like that, right? So your little mobile phone is not nearly as powerful as this thing here. This thing sitting on our heads is processing 38 trillion operations per second. 38 trillion operations per second. It's 10 million times or more powerful than this MacBook Pro that I'm using right now. And so everything is energy, and energy is everything. And you are an energy being. Yoda was right, you're a light being. And we now know from the Harvard Biophotonic Labs and the Stanford Biophotonic Labs that we emit light and that we receive light, and we can measure that light. And we now know from the DNA research that this light is carrying information and it is communicating to our DNA. So let me go back to the point I was making about sharing thoughts. You see, we have a conscious mind, and we have a subconscious mind, and we have an unconscious mind and a collective consciousness. I'm trying to keep the mosquitoes off my forehead here. They're trying to suck the blood out of me. The conscious mind is like the RAM computer, and it only can process 5 or 7 thoughts at one time. You know what you're thinking, you're aware of it, you're present. The unconscious mind is sending 100 trillion impulses to 100 trillion cells, each which hold more than 5 gigabytes of programming. That means you have more than 5 gigabytes times 100 trillion of programming stored in your cells. And what's happening is you have the subconscious mind. Now, the subconscious mind is like the software programs. The unconscious mind is like the operating system, and your conscious mind is like, you know, your RAM. So when someone starts perpetuating, you know, lock her up, or the vote was stolen, or the Antifa did this, or Black Lives did that, or whatever, the more people that start sending these thoughts out, they're literally permeating from our conscious mind, going out into the field of energy and creating a collective consciousness. That's the 4th level of consciousness. The unconscious, the subconscious, where the programs are, the conscious and the collective conscious. So as we perpetuate these things through radio waves and messages and images, we receive these things from the field of energy, the collective consciousness, and they then get stored in our mind and they get stored in our cells. This is how it works. And so the frontal cortex starts processing this thing, and when it hits an emotional trigger, which all of these people who are trying to manipulate you or get you to believe something that is false, first of all, they're all doing it for their own selfish purpose reasons, because good people who are great people, who are motivated from their heart, are not promoting hatred and division. Let me say that again. It's very easy for you to become aware of whether someone is promoting something for the conscious collective good, for the good of our country or the good of themselves, because they are not promoting fear, they are not promoting hatred, they are not promoting division. So you have to detach yourself from these people who are getting you all riled up. When you start to feel anger and hatred, then somebody is pushing your buttons. They're challenging, they're trying to hit a negative emotional trigger to promote fear, to help you become a mob. And this is what happens, right? We see this. Oh, I didn't mean to do that. I didn't mean to break the windows. I didn't mean to, beat my wife. I didn't mean to shoot that person or any of that. I lost my mind, right? They lost consciousness. And I've got a video on this whole thing about how you can clear your mind and learn techniques, but let me just stay focused on what's happening. So what's happening is their thoughts are creating a collective consciousness, which is being absorbed in your body, just like your mobile phone receiving an email with photographs and images and all that. And you start to believe that these things are real. So let's step back now and let's forget the social, political, economic, ecological, corporate, and spiritual divisions. Let's go back on the ties that bind. We share the same DNA. We share the same air, water, and minerals. We're 1 in a billion parts different. We're only 1 in a billion parts different. Yeah, I said that right. And you're a part of me and I'm a part of you, and we're all pure energy. And what we have to do is promote the ties that bind, because those are far greater than what divides. Let me give you an example. We all love playing with children. We love cooking. We love singing and dancing. We like playing sports and watching sports. There's all these things we do. And when you do them, what's happening? Why can you all of a sudden rush to the scene of somebody who's in a tragedy, a flood, a fire, put yourself at risk and save them? Because it's literally in your DNA. It's in that 5 gigabytes of programming in every cell, that there is a part of us that is a part of our spiritual essence, the invisible programming or forces within us, that we all want to be a part of something bigger than ourselves. We all want to be respected. We all want to be appreciated. We all want to be valued. We all want to be recognized. And when you focus your thoughts on that golden rule of treating others the way you want to be treated, of being respectful and tolerant, geez, it sort of somehow reminds me of the things that Jesus was saying, right? When you focus on these things, your mind can't hold opposing beliefs in the conscious mind at the same time. Go back to the conscious mind, what you are presently thinking and focusing on. So if I am helping you promote uplifting and inspiring and loving things, the conscious mind can literally not be thinking about those negative things. The opposite is true. When you're all in a lather and a mob and you're thinking all those negative, horrible things, you can't be conscious of what you're doing. The amygdala has shut off the frontal cortex part of your brain, what you're thinking consciously and logically. So let's go back and focus on the ties that bind. Do a good deed. Tell people thank you. Tell them you love them. Tell them you're grateful. Invite people over to cook or break bread when it's safe, wear a mask, okay? These are the ties that bind. And it is incumbent upon all of us in this time to focus on creating what I call an attractive resonance. Go back to we're all energy, and energy is everything. Energy that creates an attractive resonance is something that makes you feel uplifted, it makes you feel inspired, it makes you smile, sing, and dance. Think of great songs. Think of about a funny movie. What exactly is going on? It's uplifting and inspiring you. It's touching your heart. It's creating endorphins. It's creating a physical and biological reaction, and it's creating different brainwave patterns. That's what you need to do. That's what you need to focus on. We all need to go out and promote hope, and we need to have faith, and we need to turn off those people that are false prophets. We need to turn off those people who are promoting division and hatred and separation, because they are not doing this for your good. They are doing it for selfish and self-serving reasons like ambition. So, in summary, 6 great divisions: social, political, economic, ecological, corporate, and spiritual. They've been existing for decades or hundreds of years. They have created divisions in society, and we have to work to heal those divisions, and it's going to take a long time. COVID is bringing all of the issues to surface. All the people that have lost their jobs or lost loved ones, who don't know what to do, who are hungry, or losing the house over their head. You know, there's more people at the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy right now than ever before, and that's a big concern. We can't have 40 or 50 or 60 million Americans starving and homeless, my friends. The first thing we have to do is be kind and generous and be considerate and restore the foundation of our country, and then begin working on closing some of these divisions, create an attractive resonance, and promote the ties that bind. I'm J.D. Messenger. Thanks for listening. Good morning, good afternoon, and good night.